Funding for this program provided by Insurance Council of Texas.
Right now, this storm appears headed for Galveston. You could see a 20-foot storm surge from Hurricane Ike.
Residents of Galveston did not evacuate.
Hurricane Ike began forming 4,000 miles away from the Texas Gulf Coast on September 1st, 2008. It would be the sixth consecutive tropical cyclone to strike the U.S. that year. 3 of these storms would hit Texas. Hurricane Ike would form and take the same path as Galveston's 1900 storm, the deadliest hurricane in U.S. history. Hurricane Ike would measure 900 miles wide. The National Weather Service office near Galveston knew early on that Hurricane Ike would become a serious threat to anyone living on the Gulf Coast.
When it came off of Cuba, it weakened somewhat, but became much larger and intense. And we have computer models that forecast storm surge, and they were showing 15 to 20 foot surges, potentially near where the eye would make landfall and points north. So we knew it was going to be bad somewhere. There was some uncertainty in the track of the storm at first, so we weren't sure exactly where. But where that storm makes landfall and points north, we knew, given the size of the storm, there'd be tremendous surge.
38 hours before Hurricane Ike made landfall, the National Weather Service issued this bulletin warning the shorelines of Matagorda and Galveston Bays that they could expect a storm surge of 15 to 20 feet. Galveston Island, 12 to 16 feet. Life-threatening inundation likely. All neighborhoods and possibly entire coastal communities will be inundated during high tide. Persons not heeding evacuation orders in single-family 1- or 2-story homes will face certain death.
We do have those statements available for these type of storms. Hurricane Katrina was a case where there were similar sort of heightened terminology. So we don't put those phrases out lightly. We just wanted to get the point across.
Dr. Gordon Wells with the University of Texas Center for Space Research said the National Weather Service was right in forecasting dire consequences for coastal residents living in low-lying areas near the coast.
For areas that are not protected by a seawall, that are built only perhaps 4 or 5 feet above mean sea level, you could see from the model forecast that this was a storm that had a 14 to 20 foot storm surge.
Flooding began occurring in Galveston and other nearby coastal communities 2 days before the storm made landfall. The mayor of Galveston had ordered a mandatory evacuation of the city, but many residents who had evacuated 2 weeks earlier from Hurricane Gustav, which missed Texas, refused to leave. They had heard that Ike was just a Category 2 hurricane. The intensity of hurricanes is measured by the Saffir-Simpson scale. Hurricane Ike was listed as a Category 2 hurricane, meaning wind gusts were expected from 96 to 110 miles per hour. The storm surge for a Category 2 is listed as 6 to 8 feet above normal. However, Ike's storm surge was closer to a Category 4 or 5. With past hurricanes, the focus has been on the storm's wind speeds.
I think one of the lessons from Ike is this category of the storm on the Saffir-Simpson scale is not very useful. It doesn't tell us about how damaging the storm is going to be. So Ike was only you'll hear people say it was only a Category 2 storm. It was one heck of a storm. And the storm surge was, probably the biggest storm surge that that part of the Gulf Coast has seen since the early 1900s. So I wouldn't say Ike was only anything. Ike was a tremendous storm.
The coastal flooding was not the result of heavy rains, but the rising tide, or storm surge. The U.S. Coast Guard had already begun moving their helicopters hundreds of miles away to safety when calls for help began coming in.
The majority of the rescues that my crew did were before the storm, when the storm surge was hitting, and that's what was so surprising. It kind of caught us off guard a little bit too, because we already pre-positioned our assets to safety, and nobody was really expecting the storm surge to hit that early.
As the storm got closer, the water kept rising. This animation, provided by the University of Texas supercomputer and the Center for Space Research, shows where the highest storm surge struck, washing across Bolivar Peninsula and East Bay, and pushing several miles into Chambers County and along the western edge of Galveston Bay.
Okay, Ike tracked right over Galveston and into Galveston Bay. It generated significant surge, 15 to 20 feet over the Bolivar and into Chambers County, also 15 to 20 feet. Galveston Island itself, surge was more on the order of 10 to 13 feet. We also had significant surge along the Galveston Bay and Clear Lake areas. We had about 10 to 13 foot surge through here. Seabrook, Shore Acres were hit very hard. San Leon actually had surges on the order of 15 feet. Turns out northeast facing coastlines had very high surges along the bay. There was a persistent northeast wind in advance of Ike, and that built up some water levels here.
And while Galveston's 13-mile seawall did its job, the city was unprotected from its backside, where bay waters rose as high as 12 feet and flooded 75% of the city's homes and businesses. Hurricane Ike made landfall at 2:15 Saturday morning on 9/13/08. Maximum wind gusts were recorded at 110 miles per hour. The winds damaged almost half of the homes 50 miles inland in Houston and Harris County. More than half of the homes in Shore Acres on Galveston Bay were destroyed. Severe flooding also occurred in Orange and Bridge City. The total number of insurance claims from Hurricane Ike in Texas would exceed 700,000. Hurricane Ike continued moving northeastward through Texas into Arkansas and reignited over Indiana, Illinois, and Missouri. In Ohio, Ike's 75-mile-per-hour winds caused insured losses exceeding $1 billion. Along the Texas coast, it was the storm surge that caused devastation. Oceanfront homes were destroyed in 5 Texas counties from the city of Freeport to Sabine Pass near the Louisiana border. 2 Galveston County coastal cities that did fare well were Lamarck and Texas City. In 1982, Galveston County constructed a hurricane levee system and concrete flood wall that protected both cities from Hurricane Ike's storm surge. But it was a totally different story on Bolivar Peninsula, just across the bay from the city of Galveston. Of the 6,000 homes and businesses on Bolivar Peninsula, Hurricane Ike's storm surge literally wiped more than half of them off the map. The others were heavily damaged. At ground zero here in Gilcrest on Bolivar Peninsula, few homes remain. The owner of one of the last homes standing, Warren Adams, had evacuated. When he returned, he found total devastation everywhere he looked.
If I hadn't have known that there was a hurricane out there, I would have probably have thought that I came back to an area where someone had just dropped a huge bomb, because it was so devastating. When I made that corner down there, when I turned that corner and looked at the beach, it was just, it was hard to even believe. It's still hard. When you look around, there's nothing around.
Adams' home was built on slightly higher ground than his neighbors. It was also built to the new building code. It had a concrete slab, and its ground floor was just above the storm surge. The man who engineered Adams' home, David Franklin, said you can build stronger and higher elevated homes along the beach, but it's hard to protect your house when other homes and debris are washed up against it.
I've been here many times, and there's landmarks you look for, and there are no landmarks. It's just devastated, and you can see from these structures here, they were basically all the same. They were highly elevated. They were 12 by 12 reinforced concrete columns, and it appears to me the ones that did not get hit by the debris from the other homes that was in front of them was able to withstand the water and the wind loads, but the ones that actually got the debris load entered into the equation. Basically, this is what happened.
Dr. Bob Gilbert, a UT professor in the Department of Civil Engineering, agrees with Franklin, saying the ocean has a way of destroying everything in its path.
But the forces from the water, even with the offshore platforms, which are made out of steel, these are not wood, these are steel, and these piles go down 300 feet, and the structures cost, tens of millions or hundreds of millions of dollars. Even those structures, when the water gets in the deck, all bets are off. The forces are just tremendous. To try to hold something down when the ocean is pushing on it we don't know how to do that.
20 people lost their lives in Hurricane Ike, many of them here on Bolivar Peninsula. Some of those people, feared dead, remain missing. Terry Wade and her husband lived just down the road in Port Bolivar. They had sold their home in Missouri and moved here.
We're at the age, we came here, we spent our savings to build us a nice home and live on this island, and like everybody else, and then to lose it just overnight is and it's devastating at our age. How do you start over in your 60s? It's hard enough when you're in your 40s, but 60s, come on, guys.
There were once 2,000 permanent residents living on Bolivar Peninsula.
We were a growing community, nice neighborhoods being built, and children, it was really starting to grow, and then this storm just wiped it all away.
Laura Elder and her husband Michael Smith both work for the Galveston County Daily News, and they decided to ride out the storm. While they had their moments of fear, they said it was the conditions after the hurricane that were frightening.
It's the days after that are some of the hardest things that people really ought to think about before they think, oh, I want to stay. There's no power, it's filthy. And that some of the nastiest conditions I'd ever seen and walked through and lived in were on the island. So it was just, that's something you should think about before you think I want to stick around and watch a storm.
Nobody should stay unless they have a good reason for being here. I mean, if you can leave, you should leave. That's just that simple.
Dr. Bob Gilbert agrees. He said staying on a barrier island during a hurricane is a very dangerous thing to do. And after the storm, your nightmare has just begun.
Now what that means is if I live in that home, I'm going to get out of there when a hurricane is coming. And I think the real tragedy, and I didn't say this before, is that some people did not leave. And they were in those homes when those homes were obliterated, and I can only imagine what their last moments were like. But I would hope that everybody understands that when a hurricane's coming, there's no reason to stay. And even if, in the best case, you stay and your home makes it, and you're doing okay, you're not going to have power, and you're not going to have clean water, and you're not going to have a sewage system, and you're not going to have food, you're not going to have a grocery store, and you're not going to have a restaurant to go to. There's absolutely no reason to stay. And I hope that's the lesson that people get from Ike.
Galveston Mayor Lyda Ann Thomas was born on the island. Her grandfather was a city leader that helped bring the city back from the 1900 storm. Mayor Thomas said it was a hard decision ordering her citizens to evacuate the island, and even harder, telling them they couldn't return.
But the final decision, for instance, to evacuate the island, to ask people to leave, is a very hard thing to do. And then getting them back here, especially in the wake of Ike, has even been more difficult because I could not let people come home when they wanted to. And that was tough.
10 days later, residents were allowed to return, but that was just the first step in trying to bring the city of Galveston back to normal.
Hurricane Ike affected every single service that we provide, as well as every bit of our infrastructure that we use to provide that service. And so for a good period of time after the storm, several days, weeks actually, it took us a long time to restore the primary public safety, public health services to the island.
Downtown Galveston was inundated with salt water, and many of the flooded businesses were uninsured. Tillman Fertitta, who owns hotels and restaurants in some of the hardest hit areas, knew Galveston was overdue for a hurricane.
And if you look at history, though, from the 1900 storm to the 1915 to the storms in the 30s, the 50s, I was born during one of the storms, 57 Audrey, and then Carla in 61 and Alicia in 83, and then this one. When it got to 20 years, we knew we were due, because they really run on about a 20-year cycle. And so when it got to 2006, 2007, and we had been 22, 23 years, I knew we were going to get one.
Fertitta's boardwalk in Kemah suffered $30 million in losses due to the storm surge. Remarkably, along the Texas coast, many homes received little noticeable damage, while others nearby were heavily damaged or totally disappeared. Many say the state's building code had a lot to do with it.
It's absolutely amazing to go down there and look, and you'd see one home where it was substantively fine, and you go to the next home and it's gone. And you say, well, what's the difference? The difference was the building codes. For those that were built after 98 and the building code was enforced, it made a critical difference. I would say that the losses were at least 40 to 50% less for those homes that were built to code.
Starting in 1998, Texas coastal residents who built new homes and wanted windstorm insurance through the Texas Windstorm Insurance Association had to comply with new building code standards, which strengthen homes from top to bottom.
Rod goes all the way down through both floors and connects to your piling right under your floor joists.
To obtain flood insurance from the National Flood Insurance Program, the homes had pylon requirements that would elevate the homes out of harm's way. The building code would later be enforced for all municipalities, but not unincorporated areas. Even in these areas, if the homeowner wanted flood or windstorm insurance, their new home had to comply with the stronger building standards. The change was noticeable.
And I think Galveston is a great example that the beach houses that you lost in Galveston were the beach houses that were 20 and 30 years old. All the beach houses that were built in the last 10 years basically suffered no damage except some surge damage on the bottom where the pilings were and the garages were, but the homes didn't suffer any damage. And that is because of the great building code that we do have there. And I think we've all improved it again. I know things that we did when we built back Galveston and we've built back Kemah, that we're making other adjustments where certain things are going at a higher level than they were before.
Of the few remaining homes left standing on Bolivar Peninsula, many were built beyond code, conforming to a standard called Fortified for Safer Living, and engineered by the Institute for Business and Home Safety, or IBHS. But not all of these homes withstood the storm. Former State Senator Babe Schwartz was born and raised on Galveston Island, yet he sticks with his message that man ain't supposed to live on no island.
Some folks are rich enough and some folks are foolish enough to rebuild in the same place, on the same beach, on the same barrier island where they lost their first and second and third home. But we ought not to invite people to do that.
Despite the devastation, coastal residents are looking to rebuild.
With rare exception, they want to rebuild, period. There's a few that don't. A few have told us they're moving back to Missouri because they retired there and back or whatever, but the vast majority want to rebuild. I'd say 95% want to rebuild.
Schwartz warns coastal residents there will be another storm, so be prepared.
And when I say that it breaks my heart to see people who can't rebuild their homes, who had a right to expect to live in those homes all their lives. But I can't be heartbroken about people who ran the risk, knew the consequences, were given a subsidized insurance policy, and ran the risk anyhow, and said to hell with it. You know, I don't think I'm ever going to see a 1900 storm. And we've seen it, and we got it right between the eyes, and we need to make sure that it doesn't happen to us again with the same consequences.
Gary Kaufman served as president of the Independent Insurance Agents of Texas when Hurricane Ike struck his office in Galveston. Kaufman had this advice for those planning to rebuild.
Being a coastal agent, wind and flood are things that we offer on every sales call with every one of our customers. In the past, people would say, I'm going to self-insure for flood. I don't think I'm ever going to get hit. What do you think? And my advice was kind of always the same, buy all you can buy. But I understood their mentality. I understood that they thought, well, I'm 17 feet in the air. The chance of having water in my house are pretty slim. I think now most all of us will be a little more forceful when it comes to, it doesn't matter how high you are, it doesn't matter where you're located, the water can find you, and you better make sure you're insured if you plan to build here.
Republic Group President Parker Rush says you can't prevent people from wanting to live on the coast, but they need to build stronger homes.
People will rebuild there. It's impractical to think that people won't rebuild there. They will. You know, the professional side of me says, the insurance side of me says, boy, I wish they wouldn't. I wish they'd go further inland. But the personal side of me, I mean, I enjoy the beaches of Texas. It's a great place to go. I think the real situation is, can we develop the right building codes so that when these storms do happen, because they're going to happen again. This was not a one-time occurrence for Galveston, as everybody knows who's studied history. It's going to happen again, and we need to be able to construct our homes and businesses in such a way to withstand the storms.
One of the biggest supporters in rebuilding Galveston is Tillman Fertitta. He thinks it'll be a long time before another catastrophic hurricane comes along.
What happened in Galveston this time is nobody can ever remember this happening since the 1900 storm when there was no seawall. And it really took the perfect thing happening of it going up the ship channel, and people need to rebuild because it isn't going to happen again where they're sitting in 8 feet of water in their house. It just, everything happened perfectly this time with this surge.
Galveston City Manager LeBlanc said the city has a wonderful history and a strong spirit which has been challenged. And the question remains, when will the next catastrophic hurricane hit?
Physical things will ultimately be fixed. What I can't fix, I mean, the next step is the behind-the-scenes financial things that you don't see. But there's another thing that's even harder to fix, and that's the spirit and the desire to live here. I hate to say it, but many of the people, including some of my own family members, are questioning whether or not they want to stay in Galveston. And the basic question that they unfortunately can't answer is, or they can answer, and that is that it can happen again.
Hurricane Ike destroyed or severely damaged landmarks that had withstood numerous storms. The insured losses from Hurricane Ike may reach $15 billion, putting it right behind Katrina and Andrew as the costliest storm in U.S. history. Hurricane Ike was bad enough, but coupled with a struggling economy, it'll take years for Galveston, and especially Bolivar Peninsula, to recover. The storm took an emotional and financial toll on its victims.
Maybe also to my wife and to the lady folks, they may take this a little harder than us guys, but I've talked to some men that will sit down and cry over it when you get to go get your property. There's not much left.
In some cases, they're so discouraged they don't have the will to come back. We have neighbors
that she absolutely can't be on the peninsula. It makes her physically sick because she saw everything she had destroyed and she doesn't know how to cope. She has not been able at this point to get over that.
This is the best place in the world to be. Just be prepared for the worst.
Funding for this program provided by Insurance Council of Texas.
But it was a totally different story on Bolivar Peninsula, just across the bay from the city of Galveston. Of the 6,000 homes and businesses on Bolivar Peninsula, Hurricane Ike's storm surge literally wiped more than half of them off the map. The others were heavily damaged. At ground zero here in Gilcrest on Bolivar Peninsula, few homes remain. The owner of one of the last homes standing, Warren Adams, had evacuated. When he returned, he found total devastation everywhere he looked.
If I hadn't have known that there was a hurricane out there, I would have probably have thought that I came back to an area where someone had just dropped a huge bomb because it was so devastating. When I made that corner down there, when I turned that corner and looked at the beach, it was just, I mean, it was hard to even believe. It's still hard. When you look around, there's nothing around.
Adams' home was built on slightly higher ground than his neighbors. It was also built to the new building code. It had a concrete slab, and its ground floor was just above the storm surge. The man who engineered Adams' home, David Franklin, said you can build stronger and higher elevated homes along the beach, but it's hard to protect your house when other homes and debris are washed up against it.
I've been here many, many times, and there's landmarks you look for, and there are no landmarks. It's just devastated, and you can see from these structures here, they were basically all the same. They were highly elevated. They were 12 by 12 reinforced concrete columns, and it appears to me the ones that did not get hit by the debris from the other homes that was in front of them was able to withstand the water and the wind loads, but the ones that actually got the debris load entered into the equation. Basically, this is what happened.
Franklin admitted that it might be just luck that Warren Adams' home is still standing.
And you're right, I think it's the luck of the draw. As you look at Mr. Adams' house down there, he's the only one standing. He was probably the newest house there and best engineered and constructed, but still I think there was a certain amount of luck there that debris in front of him just really didn't cut the piling out from under his house.
Dr. Bob Gilbert, a UT professor in the Department of Civil Engineering, agrees with Franklin, saying the ocean has a way of destroying everything in its path.
But the forces from the water, even with the offshore platforms, which are made out of steel, these are not wood, these are steel, and these piles go down 300 feet. and the structures cost, tens of millions or hundreds of millions of dollars. Even those structures, when the water gets in the deck, all bets are off. The forces are just tremendous. To try to hold something down when the ocean is pushing on it we don't know how to do that.
20 people lost their lives in Hurricane Ike, many of them here on Bolivar Peninsula. Some of those people, feared dead, remain missing. Terry Wade and her husband lived just down the road in Port Bolivar. They had sold their home in Missouri and moved here.
We're at the age, we came here, we spent our savings to build us a nice home and live on this island, and like everybody else, and then to lose it just overnight is just, and it's devastating at our age. How do you start over in your 60s? It's hard enough when you're in your 40s, but 60s, come on, guys.
There were once 2,000 permanent residents living on Bolivar Peninsula.
We were a growing community, nice neighborhoods being built, and children, it was really starting to grow, and then this storm just wiped it all away.
Warren Adams has been staying at his home in Gilcrest while it gets repaired. He said for weeks there was nothing moving in what's left of his neighborhood.
The weirdest thing, I guess, is we just now starting to see a few birds come back. But for weeks on weeks down here, there was not even a bird, nothing, just desert. Couldn't even find a pigeon.
Laura Elder and her husband Michael Smith both work for the Galveston County Daily News, and they decided to ride out the storm.
Because we're journalists, and you can't cover a storm from another city, you have to be here.
It would have been bizarre for the local media to leave when the national and international media was arriving. I mean, we had a job to do here.
During the night, Laura watched the storm surge pour into her downtown building and rise up her stairs. Both Laura and Michael were prepared for a bad storm, but they hadn't thought of everything that could happen.
I knew rationally that this building wasn't going to come down in a 110-mile-an-hour wind, and I knew rationally that the water wasn't going to get 60 feet deep. So I knew that we were going to be okay, but still there's that kind of irrational part of your mind where you can fear anything that you can imagine, and you can imagine the building coming down, and you can imagine the water getting that high. So I guess when the eye wall was finally getting here and everything was at its peak, we kind of sat in there and held hands and wondered whether we were going to make it through. And I never really thought that we wouldn't, but still you couldn't help but thinking that a little bit.
I want to make that clear that we never were here to have fun. We just wanted to cover downtown during the hurricane. But the fire, and I was terrified when that smoke was black and there was a lot of it and things were catching on fire. And I had this huge fear of this building catching on fire, and he had to go down and turn off the breakers as the water was rising, and I was really worried about that. But that was a moment when I realized this wasn't something I had calculated. It was a fire, but it's something you should calculate when you're trapped in a home during a hurricane.
While they had their moments of fear, they said it was the conditions after the hurricane that were frightening.
It's the days after that are some of the hardest things that people really ought to think about before they think, oh, I want to stay. There's no power, it's filthy. And that some of the nastiest conditions I'd ever seen and walked through and lived in were on the island. So it was just, that's something you should think about before you think I want to stick around and watch a storm.
Nobody should stay unless they have a good reason for being here. I mean, if you can leave, you should leave. That's just that simple.